Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Frugal Noodle, the podcast dedicated to helping you understand your money, finance, early retirement, early or otherwise. And in today's episode, also understanding how you fall into this mindset, or how I personally did anyways. Now, before I even get to the disclaimer, I'm going to apologize first off for not releasing an episode last week. I ended up pretty sick. My wife did as well. Our little baby girl got us sick from something she brought back on our trip, our camping trip. It ended up being a cold or something. It wasn't COVID. We got tested for that. But it got us sick, and my in-laws got sick as well. So I'm also going to be pretty congested for this episode. I will do my best to edit out any of my sniffles, coughs, or dropping my phone like I just did. But please bear with me on that, and hopefully by next week I will be much clearer. But as a disclaimer, this is not financial advice. This is simply me sharing as I learn. Also, be sure to stick around for the end of the episode to see if we fell within or fell out of our budget of $300 for our camping trip. Now, in the intro for this entire podcast and the teaser, I talked about why I fell into this mindset, this movement, but I think there's a lot more room for me to provide more detail. And while I'm not using this podcast as a diary for myself, I think as your host, I want to be relatable, and I want you to know a little more about me and explain why I think this movement is ideal for anybody. Now, whether you relate to my reasons for falling into this movement or not, that doesn't necessarily matter. There are reasons that we all would want to retire early, or even just live frugally and more simply. And I've set off on this journey for this podcast, mainly thinking about the FIRE movement, FIRE being financial independence, retire early. But I think what this is turning more into is just taking on a simpler lifestyle so that the opportunity to retire early or on time is available to you, but also just to appreciate simpler things in life. Now, there are the events that have taken place most recently in my life that have influenced my choice to take on this simple living, frugal, early retirement lifestyle. And those I'm going to confine to the last 5 years. We, my wife and I, both bought our first house. We bought a house together, is what I mean to say. We got married, had our first child, and we talk an unbelievable amount, especially lately, about fleeing to a homestead in the woods. Buying a house motivates us for a simpler living and frugal living in general, because it's just the largest necessity we own, and likely to be the largest necessity we'll ever own. It's a home. You live in it. It's your four walls and your ceiling. It's your shelter. And we want it to be this comfortable space that we are able to decompress in. We don't want it to clutter with things, and we're still mastering that aspect. We have a lot of things from the past that we're learning to let go of and document in ways that doesn't mean owning them physically forever. Now, there's some minimalism hacks that help with this. Taking pictures of things that make you nostalgic. That way you don't need that object in your house anymore, or, tote it away in some bin in a dark corner of a closet anymore. And that doesn't mean that we're getting rid of everything like yearbooks and those little trinkets that we come across that mean a lot to us and represent some piece of our personal history on this planet. It just means that some things that may fall under that umbrella don't need to stick with us forever in its physical form. So taking pictures of those things helps. But the point is that we want to live more frugally and simply due to having our own home finally, because we don't want it to be filled with things. We want it to be filled with memories. We want the halls to echo the laughter of our children and ourselves, and our living room to have memories of movies watched and books read. Now, getting married may make some couples motivated to show love in a more materialistic way, or rather, their love language may be gift giving, and that's fine for some. But our relationship has been built on gestures and shared experiences, kind words over things. We still spoil each other with the occasional physical gift, but it's never something so expensive it requires digging out savings accounts. Marriage has motivated us to remain set on common goals in our lives together, and more on that in a moment. Having a child has been the most grounding experience and the most grounding change in our lives. It is an unexplainable shift in your perspective on the world, and it has made me challenge myself in ways I never thought or I never would have before becoming a parent. But what becoming a parent has taught us related to this lifestyle is that we want our daughter and any potential future child of ours to be influenced to live simply, not want for much, and enjoy nature. Recognize the beauty of what we have and accept that having more doesn't equate to a happier life. Understand money in ways that our parents didn't because the resources available to them were slim, whereas now we have the information age upon us. We can learn anything, and what we choose to learn most about is how to understand our money better and do better things with it, and we want our children to know the same thing. But beyond what we want to teach our daughter about living this way, there's what she's motivated us to do, which for me is to enjoy the moments of every age she'll be. And that's where the biggest push for early retirement comes in for me, because I feel absolutely hollow sitting at a desk for 8 to 10 hours a day, knowing that there are all these moments, all of these hours composed of moments that I'm missing back home, moments that are gone forever. I will never experience any one of those moments that I wasn't there for. And I have it pretty good as far as a job goes. I live very close to where I work, so I can come home on lunch and spend that time with my wife and daughter and, catch up on moments that I'm not a part of when I'm at the office. But in between the morning and lunch and the evening when I am home, those are times that I just absolutely feel like is time wasted on this planet and with my family. And I know it's not, because I'm working and I'm gaining skills and I'm getting closer and closer to the goals that I have set. But I don't know. I guess I've become kind of anti-work mindset over the years, and having a child has definitely pushed that. And I'm going to make some things clear here in a second. I'm not necessarily anti-work. I'm more anti-working for an employer. And that leads me to talking about running to a homestead in the woods, which is where our early retirement actually turns into that labor of love. So not anti-work. We've been dabbling in homesteading in our current home, and just our sample of it is a lot of work. But we find that the fruits of our labors far exceed and are far more enjoyable than any employer's position we've ever worked. It's physical and makes our bodies feel loose and fit and often sore, but it's rewarding, and we learn more with every new task or concept that we take on. And it's rewarding when we actually get to eat the food we've grown or raised. Our little taste of this lifestyle has motivated us greatly to free up our time spent working for employers so we can take on this work more seriously and enjoy the simple lifestyle of growing, raising, trapping, and hunting our own food, or building and cultivating our own property, or even taking our food to the market. It's all still work. It'll still be laborious. It'll be tiring. It'll make us ache, but it's a different reward than working for somebody else, pursuing someone else's dreams of success, your boss, your employer, and in turn receiving something monetary. And I'm not saying that this simple living lifestyle, this homestead lifestyle, is for everyone. I'd be impressed to even find it was meant for 50% of the people listening or not listening. But that's our goal. Our goal is to get away from working for others so that we can provide our needs, sustain our needs ourselves. And unfortunately, in the society we live in, that requires us to have a monetary stance that allows us to pay for and own the property that'll allow us to do that stuff. Now, before these past 5 years, even before I started dating my wife, there's a whole different me than there is today. For some reasons that are just fine and some that are not so good or fine, but those gritty details can be found in the memoir when it's released. But when I was in high school even, I knew that I couldn't stand the idea of working until I was 60 years old for someone else. Did I think I was going to be a rock star, a DJ, and at one point even a famous movie producer? Yes, I did. But that doesn't deter me from the fact that I wanted to do those things in lieu of being a slave to the consumerist mind for the bulk of my adult life. I wanted for much in my younger years than where I am now. I wanted to have more. I imagined fancy cars and a mansion at times. But I also imagined something simpler too, and I didn't know what it was though. Something that wasn't built on the consumerist mindset. So what influenced this mindset then? Why did I gravitate towards it even at a younger age? Well, it was the initial bloom of the information age with the internet introduced to me and introducing me to interesting concepts, albeit concepts that were utopian and unrealistic with a society divided as ours. But these ideas introduced me to an idea of a lifestyle that didn't involve everyone being a cog in the labor machine, as it were. I know it's very punk of me to think this. You should have seen how I dressed. But even in that time when I imagined occasionally the mansion and fancy cars with my rock star career, or, being like Eminem, like I mentioned in previous episodes, there were so many more moments of me imagining that utopian society that I imagine humans capable of, which was every individual living in a simpler way than we do now, less complicated in terms of what we do for work, because a lot of the work that we do out there is providing unnecessary things to this world. And in my utopian view of the world at that time, I imagine where people took turns working, providing necessary things. And I also imagine people not living in gigantic houses that differed from each other. And, it was very utopian and even at times somewhat dystopian. And if you really want to know what it was, the Zeitgeist movement, if you've ever heard of it, it was introduced to me through friends. And it's kind of this project surrounding this idea of humans coming together and recognizing actual needs and working together to provide those needs for each other. More of kind of like a socialist society, whatever. And I'm not saying that that's what I think we need today, but it definitely led me to this mindset of saying, what do I actually need in this life? And what do I actually need to do to get the things that I need in this life? And then after a serious relationship turned into a marriage and into a family, that mindset turned into, what does my family need to survive? And essentially that's where this is all leading. It's built up from this utopian mindset, I guess, that turns into just getting away from wanting and wanting and wanting, because that is what keeps you working and working and working for someone else anyways. And to deviate off into this lifestyle of, what do I need? How do I get it? And how much is it really going to cost me? And so those ideas and concepts turned into some mathematical equations that turn into your fire number, or in my case, my fire number, which is then my goal of how I can achieve living that lifestyle of just pursuing what is needed and still satisfying some of those wants, of course, but getting away from this idea of this, you have to have the fancy house and the car that matches it and the toys that match that, and so on and so forth. And I would say that the mindset that I have, my wife and I, our family has, isn't typical of this movement necessarily. The simple living aspect, I would say, is, although there are some people who want that described as fat fire lifestyle, which is, the big house, the fancy cars, and all of that. And their goal is still to retire early because they make a unbelievable amount of money. And that's great. If that's what you want to do and you can do it, do it. But beyond the simple living, frugal living aspect, the homestead lifestyle that we've fallen into, that we want to kind of soft retire into, that's pretty atypical, I would say, of the FIRE movement. But I thought it would be interesting to kind of do a self-analysis and weave how I got into this mindset into the show, because I think it's already deviated from just about finance several times to describe this simpler living that we do. And I guess that's kind of why I thought I wanted to do an episode like this. And, if it motivates you and you're interested in more about that lifestyle, the homestead lifestyle, there are so many resources out there. I don't necessarily want that to take over this show and become what it's about. So that's not what's going to happen. But I don't know, maybe if we're more established and we're ready to share our experience, then separate from this show, maybe we will detail it a little and be a source for people to learn more about the homestead lifestyle. But the key points for this episode: how I fell into this mindset. I was introduced to a simpler living and satisfying needs over wants at a young age in high school, in an albeit utopian, model. And then I fell in love and got married with someone with a similar outlook on life. We had a child together, and we turned that broad view into a more closed-in view of, our own family. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the episode. You must be interested in hearing how well we did on our trip budget. We set off on a camping trip, only to spend $300. That included gas, our lodging, which was just our tent, but you have to pay for the site, food, any sort of leisurely activities. We went canoeing, so we had to rent a canoe. That also included boarding our dogs. A lot of people don't always factor that into their budget. And then any other expenditures, such as going into town and buying any souvenirs, which kind of opposite of what this episode's about, spending money on things that you don't need. But we got rained on one day, so we did end up going into town a little longer than we intended to. And I think that's why we also got sick, because we were in a toy shop. Well, the only thing we bought at the toy shop was a little harmonica for our daughter, because she was interested in it. But we ended up spending $464. So we broke our budget by $164. We may not have gauged our budget as well as we could have. I think the rain really pushed us over. Probably not $160 over, but didn't help. But thank you for listening to this week's episode. I'm hoping by next week I will be less congested, less hoarse. Be sure to follow the show wherever you get your podcasts to stay up to date on the latest episodes. And follow Frugal Noodle wherever you are on social media. Links are in the show notes below. The music for this episode was produced by CARBS. Again, thank you for listening. This is Cody. I will see you next week.